Ric Flair, you are going to be yesterday's newspaper. You know, if any other wrestler tried to use a line like that in any of their promos, probably wouldn't have made a whole lot of sense. And you probably would have said, what the hell are they on about? What the hell kind of drugs did they take? Did they drink? Did they suffer a head injury? Are they just absolutely insane? But when Dusty Rhodes said lines like that and other outlandish lines, you absolutely were captivated because the little Plymouth son that came out of the ditch at 8 years old and became so sweet set the wrestling world on fire pretty much from the first time that he teamed up with Dirty Dick Murdoch. And then went to Championship Wrestling from Florida, set that territory on fire, literally and figuratively, and then went to the Crockett's to boost their business up to the stratosphere. And oh boy, this event, oh boy, this is certainly when they were on the rise, because 84 was a bit of a rough year for a variety of reasons. Let's get to it, shall we? I'm John Renton with the retro review of NWA WCW Starrcade 1984, the $1 Million Challenge from the Greensboro Coliseum, 16,000 fans and others watching on closed circuit. The gate was probably just about as big, if not a little bit bigger, than the 1983 event. But boy, the 1983 event, even though there were issues with that, in hindsight, because the event is nearly 40 years old, same with this. You know, I understand what they were trying to do with the finish for the $1 Million Challenge, but it didn't work. The crowd was chanting bullshit, and honestly, this year was rough for Crockett Promotions because Dusty was getting his team together, as you could say, getting the people that he trusted, people that he knew from various territories, people that he trusted, people that he wanted to help, form the territory. And even though, Jim Crockett Promotions were still a couple years away from absorbing other territories, you could see the pieces being put in place, but yeah, 84 was a bit rough, and you're going to see why as I talk about these matches. So, yeah, in the $1 Million Challenge, we get recaps of Ric Flair beating Harley Race at the previous year's event, the first ever Starrcade, where Gene Kiniski once again almost ruined a goddamn steel cage world title match. Gene Kiniski, one of the best world champions, ever, but, very, very respected. Gotta look back on that. It was really, really fucking frustrating. Gordon Solie and Bob Caudle on the call, and the crowd was up already. Though I will say some of these matches kind of brought the crowd down a bit. They were going to explode anyway because Greensboro was a goddamn hotbed. But Danny Brown versus Mike Davis for the NWA Junior Heavyweight Championship. Earl Hebner as a ref. Tommy Young was a referee, and I forget the other guy, but Tommy Young, terrible what happened to him. Suffering an injury and unfortunately being knocked out of refereeing, but still one of the most well-respected referees in history. It's really kind of sad, actually, that one of the last big events that he ended up being part of before his injury was the Chi-Town Rumble. And then Teddy Long made that pinfall, the pinfall count, and gave Ricky Steamboat the World Heavyweight Championship. But that was about 4.5 years after this, or 4 1/3 years after this. Nevertheless, yeah, Danny Brown hurt his back on a tumble outside, but ended up winning with a back suplex double pin, but he got his shoulder up, and he's new NWA Junior Heavyweight Champion. The NWA Junior Heavyweight Championship kind of fell off after Danny Hodge was in a car accident, suffered a broken neck, and had to retire, 76, 77? It was something like that. Yeah, they didn't really care much about the NWA Junior Heavyweight Championship. It just kind of got passed around a little bit. Tony Schiavone was with Ric Flair in his dressing room, and we'll talk to him a little bit later. Brian Adias, they kept saying Brian Adidas, kind of funny, versus Mr. Ito. So, a little bit of trivia about Mr. Ito. So, anybody remember Takeshi's Castle? If you don't remember that, you might remember it under a more popular name as far as mainstream. Most Extreme Elimination Challenge. Remember the game Circle Jerkers? Remember the blonde, bleach blonde hair guy that they called the Blue Vayner? That's Mr. Ito. Yeah, kind of funny. I don't know why it's funny. You read up on him, you knew he was a wrestler, but just kind of hilarious. And he would go through quite a transformation. He would drop some weight after this. And Brian made quick work of this and won with an airplane spin. I think it was 4 minutes. The matches really don't mean much of anything. Brian Adias, by the way, was popular in the world-class territory. Then Jesse Barr, not to be confused with Art Barr, because I don't think Jesse was as creepy as Art Barr. If you know, you know. Took on Mike Graham, Florida State Championship match, and yeah, it was well wrestled, but One should have wore different colored tights because they both wore blue tights. One had black knee pads, and I believe Jesse had a red band around his tights. But nevertheless, they were both brown haired, and I don't know. This was fine, I guess. The Florida territory was still doing well. Unfortunately, like 2 months after this, Mike would lose his dad to suicide. Eddie Graham, because of drinking and money troubles and the trouble with his territory, would end up unfortunately taking his own life, and Mike would unfortunately take his life the same way 25 years later, something like that. Just very, very sad. It was all right. There was a figure four spot and a rope break. There was a ref bump. There was no cover. And then we get a corner pin in the ropes with the feet. Corner pin with the feet on the ropes, rather. 1, 2, 3. And Jesse Barr retains the championship. I mean, it was fine. It went a bit long. I don't think this needed to go as long as it did. But then again, given some of the other matches on the card and the fact they had a lot of filler, they cut to the announcers, they cut backstage, they were doing a lot of stuff. And WWE was as guilty of doing it too, but damn. Match quality until a little bit later on didn't really actually kick in with this show. And we get recaps of Dick Slater and Ricky Steamboat getting laid out by Outlaw Ron Bass and Black Bart and J.J. Dillon helping. And I believe they were taping in, I don't remember the venue that it was. They did a lot of tapings there. It had concrete pillars in. I'm just struggling to remember the name. I remember hearing it on podcasts, but nevertheless. We get the Zambui Express, Elijah Akeem and Kareem Muhammad, with Paul Jones versus Assassin Number 1, a.k.a. the late Jody Hamilton, and Buzz Tyler. Buzz Tyler, who was channeling the Boogie Woogie Man, Jimmy Valiant, by the way. And it's an elimination tag, and the funniest thing about this is only one guy got eliminated, and then they just called the match off after 5 minutes. I guess they either didn't want to have the Zambui Express both take pins, or they said, hell with it, we're not going to do that, we'll just have one get counted. Because it was really weird. 2 people were supposed to be eliminated, or they could have upwards of 3 eliminations and one person would be left standing, and only one person got pinned. I mean, unless I just totally blanked on this, they did it really weird. Shivani was backstage with Dusty, and all about the main event and everything. $1 million goes in my pocket, and the NWA World Heavyweight Championship comes home, and you are yesterday's newspaper, Ric Flair. Doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense. I mean, I know he's supposed to say you're yesterday's news. Dusty. He's Dusty. I mean, how could you not love him? So, Manny Fernandez took on Black Bart with J.J. Dillon in his corner for the NWA Brass Knuckles Championship. And the idea was closed fists are legal. Punches are legal. And, of course, Fernandez bled. Because if it's a day that ends in Y and Manny Fernandez was wrestling, he was going to bleed. He was going to bleed a lot. Black Bart bled. And then we get J.J. Dillon tossing the bull rope to Black Bart, but that causes an issue and a roll-up 1, 2, 3. The most devastating maneuver in all professional wrestling. A surprise roll-up 1, 2, 3. And the NWA Brass Knuckles Championship, I believe, was starting. It was either in Houston or Dallas. I think it was Houston. I think it was. But nevertheless, I mean, this was fine. I mean, you couldn't really expect wrestling between these guys because even though they had talent, they were best known as brawlers. Shivani then interviews Steamboat in a boiler room, seemingly. I don't know why they chose the boiler room for these interviews, but whatever. Promos were never a strong suit, but Steamboat was focused. I mean, I love Steamboat. Natural, one of the best good guys ever in wrestling. Bob Caudle and Gordon Soley kill time. Dillon and Tully talk about the match upcoming with Steamboat, but that doesn't come up for a few more matches. Paul Jones, with one of the Zambui Express members, took on the Boogie Woogie Man, Jimmy Valiant, with Assassin Number 1, Jody Hamilton. So people were working twice, technically. It's a tuxedo street fight. Loser leaves town. This Paul Jones versus Jimmy Valiant feud would not end. It would never end. It would never be over. And it was kind of hilarious just looking back on it, because it went on for years. I think it went at least to Starrcade 86. Maybe it went, I don't know, maybe it ended in 85. I'm trying to remember. My NWA knowledge gets a little bit jumbled. The crowd loved Jimmy. Jones got stripped of his clothing except for his briefs. That was uncomfortable. And Paul Jones was a former wrestler, had a bad back, and he had to get into managing. And then we get intentional bleeding on camera, because he was bleeding already, but it's like they had this where I believe Valiant had him in a sleeper, and he's just doing this. It's right on camera. I mean, my God. We get a ref bump. We get a brawl between Assassin number 1 and one of the Zambui Express members. JJ clocks Valiant and 1, 2, 3. So Valiant must leave the territory. I think he went to Georgia Championship Wrestling for a bit and then came back after they folded Georgia Championship Wrestling into Jim Crockett Promotions. Because Georgia Championship Wrestling was on his goddamn ass by this point. The crowd was pissed, by the way. Because goddamn it, how dare you, Paul Jones? Anyway, then Shivani interviews Flair. He was calm and focused. He wasn't the usual woo, 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 woo. He was very calm and focused here. Very reserved. Dick Slater, that noted abuser, by the way, if you know, you know, took on Ron Bass for the Mid-Atlantic Championship. J.J. Dillon, who was everywhere. I know J.J. Dillon got a really good bonus for this because he was everywhere. I mean, I know a lot of people had to work twice, but goddamn, he was out there a lot. Dick wanted revenge on both guys. For the Slater good. Okay, that was terrible. He had to fight 2-on-1. Slater ended up throwing the referee at one point. Just, get out of here. I want to battle this guy. Dillon jumps in, gets slammed, and the ref calls for a DQ. And Slater thought he won off of a leg drop, but he is not Hulk Hogan. And he lost by a DQ, and then brawled with both of them. I guess he got revenge? Kinda? Ivan and Nikita Koloff took on Ole Anderson and Keith Larson, which sounds like a CPA. Sounds like they just, pluck the name of the Keith Larson, CPA, Keith Larson, attorney at law or whatever, and they just plucked. He didn't have a bad look, but I don't remember much about Keith Larson. Don Cornotto was in the corner, and he was on crutches and a neck brace because he got injured recently. And Ivan sure loved being a heel. He helped Nikita quite a bit. And Ole Anderson, as a face, was weird. Keith got beat up for a bit, but had a good showing. Then Ole got beat up for a while, even selling for a bear hug. Then we get a melee. Two guys are outside. Nikita and Ole are outside. Ivan ends up hitting Keith with the chain while the referee's distracted. 1, 2, 3. This went 15 minutes, by the way. This went 15. And it was fine. It was fine for what it was. And Cornotto then comes in with his crutch and wears out the Russians to a pop, so at least we get that. So not only did, the fans get, not only were they pissed seeing heels win 3 times in a row, but at least they got a little bit of a good send-off for this. And then we get to the matches that actually were a bit this wasn't bad, but this went a bit long. I don't think a lot of people knew who Keith Larson was. If you know who he is, please let me know in the comments. So, Tully Blanchard took on Ricky Steamboat. $10,000 challenge for the U.S. title, because Steamboat had mentioned that him and Tully had put up some money out of their own pockets. J.J. Dillon in the corner, by the way. Again, everywhere. And look, Steamboat, you can't help but love Steamboat. He was a natural. Tully was a great heel. Tully bled at one point, and they were doing some, good action here. We got a splash at one point, and then it looked like we were about to get a sunset flip, and the referee was out of position. Tully pulls something out of his tights. Boom! Hits Steamboat in the face. 1, 2, 3, and there you go. That's it. Tully Blanchard retains the championship. And actually, if I remember it, I think Dick Slater, because Dick Slater was in Georgia Championship Wrestling, I think he might have made appearances for WWE sometime later. But Steamboat went to WWE very soon after this, because you got to think about it. This was November 22nd, 1984, and he was on the Mania 1 card. And he was there for a few years. Because he had some issue with Dusty. It's either how Dusty was booking him, he didn't feel that Dusty appreciated him, which, I can kind of see both sides. But and probably because Steamboat was, let's be honest, a younger babyface. And yes, Dusty was no, old man by this point. But this was where Dusty was kind of asserting his power and was like, okay, I'm going to be the top babyface, baby. That was really hard to do, by the way, without stumbling over my words. See, if I'm not careful, then I'll be yesterday's newspaper. But Steamboat would leave. Others would leave. There would be people going to Georgia Championship Wrestling, and it would be doing all their, or Championship Wrestling from Georgia, or however the fuck they said it, but because there were a few variations. But people would go different places, and since Crockett kind of, had control of that, that's why they decided to do, a co-promoting thing. That's why the Midnight Express went there after they left World Class, and they would fight against the Sawyers, Buzz Sawyer, that guy who was probably one of the oldest mid-20s looking guys back then. And I think he was, 32, 33 when he passed away. He was pretty goddamn old looking, despite the fact that he was still pretty youthful, age-wise. Anyway, speaking of people who weren't youthful, Wahoo McDaniel against superstar Billy Graham, the karate expert. Remember when Billy Graham went absolutely insane and decided to become a karate expert and it made no sense? Well, congratulations, you get to see it in full force here. 4 minutes, and it was excruciating. NWA US Championship match, by the way. This was goddamn excruciating. Holy shit. Graham was never good in the ring, but got by on charisma and went with the right people. Could tell a good story. He was a good heel. He could be a good babyface with the right people to work with him, but God, nothing. Granted, he did so many steroids and had so many issues, and his hips were mulched by this point that he couldn't even move. He lost to a tomahawk chop within 4.5 minutes. And so they had a lot of extra time. And you could tell they had a lot of extra time. Because they had about 30-something minutes left. And 35 minutes, Shivani's with Joe Frazier, Kyle Petty, and Duke Kiyomuka, who worked in Texas, and I know they've worked other places, but Texas is where I remember hearing about him from. And if you knew nothing about these three, or if you knew a bit about Joe Frazier, if you knew Kyle Petty, but you didn't know who Duke Kiyomuka was, you'd look at okay, well, he's not going to talk, because some people would just say that. And if you know a little bit, Duke, eloquent, speaking just fine, and says this, we're going to call it right down the middle, and we're going to decide if it goes the distance, we're going to decide who wins. And he spoke the best out of anybody, because Joe Frazier spoke like somebody that had about 2 detached, brain stems, and you only have one brain stem, one big brain stem. And Kyle Petty, well, he tried. I think his hair was blocking off any ability for him to think. And then, big entrances for everybody. Everybody, even the popcorn vendor. No, I kid. Dusty, Flair, big old pomp and circumstance. Joe Frazier in the ring. Flair versus Dusty. $1 million world title challenge. And then, they always worked well together. This is probably the worst of the big matches they ever had. This is excruciating. The crowd was into it, but this barely got started. Had this gone 17 to 20 minutes, I think they could have justified it. They rushed this thing. I don't know if they rushed it because of the closed circuit broadcast limit. I don't know why. I understand they were probably trying to make this a shoot, but Dusty gets busted open later in the match after Flair focuses on the leg and Dusty comes back with the bionic elbows and all that. And even though we've seen Dusty bleed way worse before this, and we saw Dusty bleed way worse after this. And I don't know what the hell the deal was. Dusty did gig himself so much that it actually would sometimes be where Dusty needs to gig through all this. And then what ended up happening is Joe Frazier calls it off. For the term pap smear might be used. I must kill pap smear. Naked Gun, so goddamn good. But people were pissed. People were goddamn pissed. And commentary's trying to kill time. Dusty's trying to go after Joe Frazier. Flair retains the championship. Flair would actually end up holding it, if I'm right. He might have dropped it to a couple people in Puerto Rico during his tours there. I think he held it pretty much after he won it back from Kerry Von Erich. He held it for just over 2 years. Because he would drop it during the 1986 Great American Bash Tour just afterwards. And Dusty would hold it for a little bit, then Flair would win it back. But Shivani was with Flair. Dusty's pissed. He gets people out there. I want Joe Frazier. Because he was trying to channel all this. And it wasn't, this wasn't very, didn't click. 85 would get better. Shockingly, I've actually reviewed every single Starrcade except for 88 and 89, so I may review those during December. We will see. But yeah, I just wanted to get basically the last Thanksgiving Starrcade, event out, out in the open, out on video, or out on, the internet, whatever. I don't really think it's video anymore, but I just wanted to do that because I wanted to relive this. And God, 84 was a rough time for Crockett. So anyway, agree, disagree what I said, like, share, subscribe, Twitter handle in the description. I'm John Ritlin. I'll see you soon.